After 20 years, the Taliban is back in power in Afghanistan. It says it will protect women's rights and set up an inclusive government. But has the armed group changed its ways? And what type of administration will emerge? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Millions of Afghans who lived through the 1990s remember the Taliban's harsh rules and governing style. But the armed group says it has changed as it gets ready to lead the country once again. In its first news conference since taking Kabul on Sunday, the Taliban promised to protect women's rights, give amnesty to those who worked with foreigners, and respect media freedoms. Its leaders also said they will not let other groups use Afghanistan to launch attacks on any country. And they've called on women and other minorities to join their government. But many Afghans and world leaders are skeptical. We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Charlotte Bellis in Kabul.
After years in the shadows, the Taliban spokesman's face was finally revealed. Zabihullah Mujahid, fronting for the first Taliban press conference in 20 years. As 7,000 US forces scrambled to evacuate Americans on military planes, the Taliban called it an historic moment.
Taking the freedom is the right of all nations. The Afghan people, by using their legal right, after 20 years of war, were able to take their freedom and clean their country of the occupation and occupiers.
While the group could not reveal who will lead the country, Mujahid said talks are ongoing for an inclusive political system and promised all Afghans' rights will be respected.
There's a lot of concern about whether women will be allowed to work, that girls can still go to school. What assurances can you give to women and girls that their rights will be protected?
The Islamic Emirate is committed to the right of women within the framework of Sharia. Our women have the same rights. They are going to be working shoulder to shoulder with us. We want to assure the international community there will be no discrimination against women, but of course within our religious framework.
But after years of war, trust is hard to come by.
As a woman, should I be scared of the Taliban?
No, why should you be scared of us? You should never be afraid of us.
The Taliban has asked everyone in Kabul to continue their lives as usual and keep going to work. It has also declared an amnesty for all those who worked against the armed group, saying all is forgiven and that embassies and foreign nationals should feel safe.
The Taliban has sought to portray itself as more moderate than during its 1990s rule, yet people are wondering if this really is the Taliban 2.0.
The situation in Kabul is really good now. The Taliban are here, and we have taken control of security, and we will hold it until the end.
The Taliban have made a number of statements that on the surface are reassuring, but as I said, actions speak deeper than words, and it's very early now, it's very fluid. It's very hard to say what is happening exactly.
Yet the Taliban are in high spirits and defiant. Afghanistan's days as a battlefield are over. Mujahid said he hoped people stopped fleeing and stayed to be assets for the nation.
We have pardoned everyone, all those who have fought against us. We don't want a repeat of war. We want to do away with the factors of conflict, so the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan does not have any conflict with anybody. We want the fighting to end.
Mujahid stated journalists should remain free and independent to critique the group so it can improve. One journalist asked, "You say you can forgive everyone, but do you think the victims can forgive you?" For Afghans on all sides, there is a lot of healing ahead. Charlotte Bellis, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
All right, let's take a closer look at how the Taliban ruled Afghanistan back in the 1990s. The armed group was formed in 1994 by Mullah Omar, a former mujahideen who fought against the Soviets in the 1980s. His movement attracted popular support because of the lawlessness, corruption, and instability that followed the Soviet exit. The Taliban took full power in 1996 after the fall of Kabul and controlled nearly 90% of the nation. It barred girls from going to school and imposed capital punishment for various crimes. And the Taliban government was overthrown in 2001 after the U.S. invasion triggered by the 9/11 attacks. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Kabul, Fahim Sadat, head of the International Relations Department at Kardan University. In Belfast, Michael Semple, practitioner, chair at the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice at Queen's University, Belfast. And in Washington, Omar Samad, a former Afghan ambassador to France and Canada and a former advisor to Afghan Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks for being with us today on Inside Story. Fahim, let me start with you today. The Taliban has said they're looking to form an inclusive government. What, from your perspective, does that mean, and will non-Taliban figures make up a part of the new government?
Well, by inclusive, according to me, that would be giving space to all those people who were once fighting the Taliban as part of the previous government, and also other minorities such as Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Hazaras in the government, so that everybody sees themselves in a future government, and no one seems themselves marginalized, because that has always been one of the concerns amongst the people, that if Taliban form a sort of one-handed unilateral government, then what about the minority rights and a political position for them? So by inclusive, I believe it must be wide-ranging and covering all those who were not Taliban, or who were once opposed to the Taliban rule.
Omar, let me ask you the same question I just asked Fahim. I mean, from your perspective, what's the makeup of any future government going to look like?
Very difficult to say at this point, as discussions are ongoing. We saw some astonishing pictures and news from Kabul today with Anas Haqqani, who once was incarcerated in Kabul not long ago, back in Kabul and having meetings in Abdullah's house with Karzai, Abdullah, and others. And then he went on to meet with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar as well. And then you have a delegation of Afghans belonging to the old Northern Alliance. Some of them, obviously. Others are taking an opposition viewpoint right now. But two of Masood's brothers, for example, a former foreign minister, Rabbani, and others who are in Islamabad, Pakistan, for the past couple of days and have been holding talks with Pakistanis, and maybe even having meetings with Taliban too, but they will be back in Kabul. So there's a push to create a broad-based government. But I think this is going to take to be a two-stage affair. Stage one is, first of all, to agree to some kind maybe of an interim or transitional setup. And we should expect that to be broad-based. Then they will have to work on something more permanent. That may take months or maybe a year or more. And what Mr. Mujahid, the Taliban spokesman, yesterday called sort of creating a new state, and a new state order and a new political order. And that's going to take a bit longer because there are many discussions that have to take place. We don't know eventually if there will be a constitution approved, but I see this as a two-step process at this point.
Michael, Omar just mentioned these meetings that took place in which Hamid Karzai and Abdullah Abdullah were a part of. I mean, to you, is that an encouraging sign?
I think we have to be absolutely clear that efforts to achieve a broad-based government which could end the conflict have been underway for a long time and until now have comprehensively failed. The Taliban exercised the option of using armed force to grab all power for themselves. They have succeeded in that. They are continuing the messaging that they are interested in a broad-based government. And if one emerges, I think that most Afghans and most in the international community would welcome it, but they haven't done a single thing other than use words to show their commitment to that. So I think if we look to the spirit of the movement on the ground, the fighters who succeeded in overthrowing the Afghan government, they're not waiting for a broad-based government. They're not waiting to share power with anyone. As far as I'm concerned, they're determined to establish a government led by the Taliban, which will enforce Sharia law and establish a new state, which is essentially in name or otherwise a repeat of the emirate which they had previously. So, I mean, at the moment, these are talks, these are ideas. It would be great if they worked out, but we haven't seen a single compromise from the Taliban throughout this period. And there is a possibility, which I think that all of us must take seriously, which is that the continued talks in Islamabad, the new talks in Kabul, are just a way of trying to keep hope alive while the Taliban consolidate themselves in sole control of the Afghan state. I mean, this is at the moment the most likely outcome. And I have heard nothing from the talks underway to suggest that the Taliban actually are ready to receive anybody with any political weight, any support in constituencies outside the Taliban into government. So at the moment, yeah, they're talking about this. The reality is the Taliban have grabbed power and the Taliban get to call the shots as to who will be in the new government.
Fahim, could you just tell our viewers for a moment what the mood is like in Kabul right now? I mean, what are you hearing from people? Are they concerned? Is there a sense of worry? And do they largely believe what the Taliban is saying about it being a more moderate style of leadership now than it was in the 1990s?
Well, Mohammed, there is optimism and as well as concern. The optimism is that the Taliban largely entered to Kabul with a bloodless and a civilian way. There were no battles in Kabul, which was an extreme concern to everybody, because you have had a capital filled with almost more than 6.5 million people. Any battle within the capital would have been disastrous and catastrophic. And after the Taliban entered the city, they largely curtailed the anarchy and as well as the looting of the public infrastructure and other things. Also, seemingly up to now, from my personal perspective, the Taliban I have met till now, they are so much of a moderate approach. They are well behaved, and this seemingly seems normal. That is, and also we are hearing of the national amnesty as well as Zabiullah Mujahid briefings yesterday to the public, where a lot of things were mentioned and they were all taken positively. The concern at the same time is that there hasn't been a clear roadmap announced by the Taliban, that what would be the future roadmap, what sort of a government will Afghanistan have, and also we still have Amrullah Saleh, who announced himself yesterday as the legitimate acting president of Afghanistan, who is seemingly at Panjshir at the moment with the son of the slain commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, who has already announced a resistance 2.0. That is also a concern now because if we don't have a broad-based, all-inclusive government, and these people start a new resistance, that means that the war will not end, and still we would witness battles in the pockets of the country or largely in the steppes, but there will be a war. So the people are happy because what we see is a different Taliban. Also, at the same time, they are concerned about the future roadmap, and because there is no clarity yet that what sort of a governance structure or system would Afghanistan have after this.
Omar, you spoke a few moments ago about what you believe needs to happen for negotiations to go forward. But let me ask you if you think that there will be any international mediators playing a part in any talks going forward.
At this point, I don't think so. A mediation could have been possible if all sides had agreed in Doha. I think that negotiations and talks are now going to shift to Afghanistan. Cynicism aside, I think that the record is now clear. We can spin this as we want, but the record is that over the last 3 years, and especially over the last 18 months, and I know for a fact the Taliban put forward on 2 occasions a power sharing arrangement and with details of how this can be done to Afghan politicians in Kabul. The person who basically sabotaged it was Ashraf Ghani. Everybody now in Afghanistan knows this. And Ashraf Ghani, for his own purposes, his own political purposes, was single-handedly did not want a deal because he knew that the Taliban were in agreement to have talks with everyone in Afghanistan, anyone in Afghanistan, except Ashraf Ghani. So Ashraf Ghani saw himself as a target, and the Taliban were not ready to talk to him or negotiate with him. This is why he was an obstacle to the peace process moving forward. Obviously, there were other reasons as well, but that was the main reason. And everybody in Afghanistan now knows this. It's part of the record, and we cannot change history with narratives that are false. We need to now grasp the moment. There's an opportunity for Afghanistan to come together, to unite. There are Taliban who are against a broad-based approach. There are other politicians who are opposed, like Mr. Saleh, to even deal with the Taliban. He wants to fight. There are all kinds of different shades of politicians in Afghanistan, and people are still willing to fight. But the majority of Afghans, I would say, now want stability and peace, and they prefer a broad-based approach at this moment until we go towards a more solid political system that reflects the will of the majority of the Afghans.
Michael, how much has all of this changed the geopolitical map in Asia? And how much is this going to be benefiting Russia and China? I mean, are they going to be stepping in and essentially filling the void that was created by America's departure?
Well, it's quite clear that the Afghans are so far suffering. Although, of course, we're listening to the hope that Umar is offering. The people who've lost out are the Afghans. If nothing else, millions of Afghans have had their livelihoods disrupted. But the United States has withdrawn from the region. It is still not clear how that void is going to be filled. Of course, Pakistan can be expected to back this government, but whether the Taliban make it easy to do that or not depends on the decisions that they make in the coming days. If they put together a hardline militant regime and do not make the compromises necessary, even Pakistan is going to find itself under pressure for engaging with them. I think the Chinese preference is indeed to engage in collaboration with Pakistan. Iran is very concerned with the development and is still strongly supportive of the idea of a broad-based government. I think they feel that they can engage if there is a broad-based government, but it's not sure whether that can be pulled off. I think that we should expect a period of transition in terms of the geopolitics and the regional politics of it, to see whether the Taliban can get themselves into the kind of shape that people can deal with or not. Because until this week, the stated position, both in the region and internationally, was that nobody would deal with a Taliban regime which had been imposed by force, and now a Taliban regime has been imposed by force. So the international actors are left with a serious quandary.
Fahim, let me ask you about a couple of things that Michael mentioned there. First of all, what role do you think Pakistan is going to play in negotiations going forward? Secondly, do you believe that Russia is going to be open to working with the Taliban going forward?
Well, I think both these countries have their concerns, and they would want Afghanistan or Taliban to address them. For example, Pakistan at the moment wants to be a trade hub of Central Asia, looking at the CPIC project, which is a flagship part of the BRI. in order to become a trade hub for Central Asia, Pakistan needs a peaceful Afghanistan. And if there is peace in Afghanistan, then that project or that dream can come true. But if there is chaos and war, definitely then that would remain as a dream. So a peaceful Afghanistan is definitely in favor of Pakistan. With Russia, you had the concerns of illegal drug trade and also the spillover of extremism. Now, this also largely depends on the Taliban's behavior. Apparently, as we see, the Taliban's ambitions and claim is, as they say, is limited to Kabul. They want to have an Islamic government and a state in Afghanistan. That means they are not concerned for regional causes of other groups. Mm-hmm. So if that happens and Russia is sure of Afghanistan not being a launch pad, then I think the Russians would align themselves somehow, because we should also not forget that one of the major concerns for Russia was Daesh too. Mm-hmm. And if Taliban are prepared to curtail Daesh, that would further bring both the future states closer. Mm. So it largely depends on how Taliban addresses these concerns and how they practically look at these concerns. Mm. So if these countries see their interests being somehow achieved through a Taliban government, I think they will have no other problem. And apparently, as it seems, the Russians have said that they would be cautious in recognizing the government, which means they will have to still see some actions being taken by the Taliban.
Omar, of course, there is a lot of concern right now that there could be a refugee crisis now that the Taliban has taken power and that so many Afghans want to leave the country. What are the humanitarian implications of all that has happened?
Well, it depends on which reports you read and what accounts you trust more. There is a humanitarian problem in Afghanistan overall. There wasn't a humanitarian problem before the Taliban started their military campaign. That has probably been exacerbated by now because of the fact that the government is no longer providing services as it should. These things will have to change very quickly. The Taliban, whether they're going to be broad-based, whether they're going to include some technocrats and bureaucrats in the system to run the show, whether they are going to have, inclusivity in the system and are going to be more flexible and compromising, have a huge responsibility on their shoulders now, not only to maintain security and stability, but also to make sure that the Afghan population's needs are addressed, humanitarian and otherwise, that the government is back on its feet and can function, even though the government was a corrupt government, was a government that really had very limited capacity to provide, and it didn't even control at least half of the country until a few weeks ago. So with all of that, now at least all of Afghanistan is in one hand, but the Taliban will have a hard time running and managing affairs unless, as I said, they open the space, unless they bring in expertise, unless they show flexibility, unless they engage the international community in ways that the international community wants it to be engaged, unless they can absorb and ask for assistance and aid that Afghanistan will need for years to come. So all of this, obviously, is going to be part of challenges that the Taliban will be facing moving forward.
Michael, we only have about 30 seconds left, so I'm going to ask you to please keep your answer short. Do you believe there's going to be schisms going forward within the Taliban? Do you believe that there will be a power struggle?
I think the Taliban are very good at maintaining their internal unity. For the now, they will manage to maintain that. The question is whether there will be resistance from outside.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave our conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Fahim Sadat, Michael Semple, and Omar Samad. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.